Welcome. So today we're going to be talking about air quality. Hopefully you've seen the climate change planetary health video, which talks a little bit about the big picture of why all of this matters. This one will cover a little bit more about some of the specific details related to air pollutants and how they contribute to climate change, which are the ones we really need to keep in mind, how do we even measure this, and how do they impact our human health? How does that even work? So we're going to be going through all of those things today as part of this. So our country is diverse, which is amazing. There are all sorts of things that are happening. So for us, since we're in Oregon, we are going to be focusing a lot on wildfire as one of our examples. But if you were in the Southeast, you might care a lot about the hurricanes and the increased frequency and severity of hurricanes. Or you might care about the tornadoes if you're in a different area of the country. So again, these are all lenses for kind of thinking about climate change and thinking about how air quality affects our health. So for those of you who are in Oregon, you may remember the Eagle Creek fire, which was back in 2017. So this was when some fireworks were thrown into a park area, and it caused a large increase in wildfire in that region. This was just one of many that were happening during the 2017 fire season. It was quite substantial. And one of my favorite sites is this earth.nullschool.net. There's a link for it later in this video. But one of the things that you can see is that carbon monoxide from fires is amazing for being able to predict and see fires happening very fast. So this is just over a couple of days. You can also, the thing that I like, is that it allows you to look at parts per billion in these various chemicals. So this is looking at carbon monoxide. Over on the right-hand side, you're looking at particulate matter, which is size 2.5, so 2.5 microns, so small. And as we're moving through, this is a way for users to be able to visualize, which I very much appreciate. So this carbon monoxide, one of the things that comes up in fires, is really damaging to health. So it's often measured in parts per million, and there are certain levels that are considered low that might be okay, but I mean, no level of carbon monoxide is necessarily okay. But as we're starting to move forward, as you have higher levels, you might notice some increases in chest pain, or you might have some headache or nausea or fatigue, and that can be a problem, especially as you move forward. So carbon monoxide, you might remember, those are the cars and tailpipes, and you'll often hear about deaths in closed spaces. So this was the Eagle Creek fire, and you can use Air Quality Index, which is available from airnow.gov, and you can see what you should be keeping an eye out for. Like, is it okay to be outside, or is it a little bit too unhealthy to be out for certain groups, for example? So Air Quality Index, in case you're not familiar, so this is on a 0 to 500 scale, and they have different levels, different colors that indicate the quality of the air. The other thing that you'll notice is that one of the things that's really important is that there are 5 major air pollutants that were regulated by the Clean Air Act, and these all go into this air quality index, and those are listed on the slide right there. But you can think of the air quality index as a yardstick for pollution, so the higher it is, the greater the level of concern. So I showed you from Eagle Creek. This is from 2020. This is from the wildfire season that just happened. And, as we had this, red flag alert, which is, we have crazy high winds that just popped up. So if things are dry and they could knock over trees, which hit the electrical lines, they can spark a fire. And because of the high winds, they will spread fire very, very quickly. And that is exactly what you see. So you can see over, a 4-day period how the Pacific Northwest just exploded with wildfire, and it produced a really terrible air quality for us, which you probably remember. So previously was carbon monoxide. This is through the fire and smoke map through airnow.gov, and so you can see that it's pretty gross for most of the West, unfortunately. And then this was I have never seen it like this before, where you have so much hazardous air quality predicted for such a huge range of the population, where it's very difficult to escape it. So I wanted to pull up a few of the air quality index maps, so you can kind of see what it generally looks like at various places around Portland. So Portland, Estacada, Florence, etc. So up in Portland, for example, this is on the 11th, and you'll notice that, the air quality index was 596. It took the highest number, so this is 596 for PM10, so 10 microns, particulate matter that was 10 microns, versus PM2.5, which is the 2.5 size. You also have some increases in carbon monoxide, and you can plot air quality index as a whole over time. So this is based out of Southeast, so green was fine, and then you can see that it gets into hazardous levels. As you get closer to the fire, so Portland is of course, our major metropolitan area. Estacada is closer to the fire, and you can see how some of those levels will increase and shift as you get closer to that area. So we're seeing increases in sulfur dioxide, for example. You have more of these nitrogen dioxides, whereas in Portland they were fine, for example, just generally speaking on the same day. It's a day apart. I recognize there could be some differences, but for general principle, you can see that. The other thing that I noticed is that, sometimes you'll see these spikes. And so there was a period right around 8 o'clock at night where we had this crazy spike in carbon monoxide for Portland. So, it just raised the air quality index for that period of time. Likewise, we saw that it wasn't just Portland or in this really discrete regional place, but, areas near the coast, so down near Florence, they also are experiencing poor air quality. And what is wonderful is now we're being able to move towards social media for really alerting a larger group of individuals what that air quality is expected to be over time so they can better prepare themselves. So you can see that map in the bottom right-hand corner showing what's going to happen on Thursday versus Friday. So as we're starting to think about some of these things, remember that wildfires aren't just burning some of these forests, which is unfortunate in itself, but we're starting to burn the homes. So what is happening in these homes? What is being burned inside? So we're seeing burning of plastics, we're seeing burning of insulation. In some of the older homes, there may be asbestos that gets released into the air. So there are going to be increased things that are going to be burned. Which one of those are toxic? Which ones of those are persistent? Also, not everyone was able to be indoors. So this overlaps very significantly with our harvest season in Oregon. Oregon has this beautiful agricultural climate based on being in the valley. And so there was a lot of concern over how our food supply might be impacted, either through smoke taint or some of the particulate materials that are in the air getting into the food. And then also there are issues of how are we going to be able to harvest when the air quality is so poor. So we have, limited masks. The individuals who are going out are not necessarily protected, which is a problem, and they are staying out for longer periods of time. So some of these masks may protect against particulate matter, but they may not protect against carbon monoxide, which can go right through. So we need to be cautious of the individuals who are going out. And likewise, since it was so vast, you saw the map that was showing the predicted forecast over the next couple of days, but you could see that most of it was dark purple. So it wasn't like you could escape to a certain part of the state. It was predominantly the whole state that was being impacted. So the data are becoming more and more convincing that air pollution is worsening health. So there was a report, the State of Global Air report that just came out last week, and it's now the fourth leading risk factor for early death. There's also a paper that came out last week that was looking at linking air pollution with neurological diseases down the road. So the data are mounting that air pollution is having a significant impact. And I think that we still discount it. We're like, everything is fine, but it's not fine. And then I put this at the bottom because, there may be some potential for intervention. So one study was looking at low vitamin D and how higher levels of vitamin D may be able to mitigate some of the impacts of air pollution. So I appreciated what can we do for moving forward. So as we think about some of these things, so these are some cards that I put together trying to think through these various compounds because they're all a little bit different. They all sound foreign if you're not familiar with them and seeing them all the time. And you're like, well, what do they do and how am I going to remember them? So we have some tricks for keeping those in mind, but they're different. They come from different places. They do different things, but they generally all contribute to air quality. So for example, I put this table together for kind of helping me think, where are we seeing some of these sources from various places? So one of my favorites is this nitrogen dioxides combined with volatile organic compounds in the presence of sunlight to produce this tropospheric ozone. So again, ozone is just 3 oxygen molecules together. So if it's way up high in the stratosphere, that is fantastic. So good up high. But if it's down in the troposphere, down lower, bad nearby. So that's where it can aggravate some of the lung tissue, for example. So as we're thinking about some of these things, for example, if you're trying to mitigate smog, the strategy you use is going to depend on what is happening in your environment. So for example, if we're talking about nitrogen dioxides or nitrogen oxides and VOCs combining, natural VOCs are so high in the east, again, those are those Great Smoky Mountains, that you can't really control smog through that mechanism. So you have to really control it through reducing nitrogen oxide emissions. Whereas over in the West Coast, you have lower amounts of VOCs, not naturally producing from the trees, etc. So by controlling those VOCs, it's a better strategy for mitigating smog. So you can look at your area where you grew up, the area where you live is going to will influence the strategy that is being used. So you won't need to necessarily know the details, but there are different ways that people, when they talk about like particulate matter, and that's the PM1 versus PM2.5 versus the PM10, there are all sorts of ways that it's measured. So if you want to go down the wormhole for that, know that that is where you can start looking. The other thing that I really appreciate is that there are different sensors that are all around the world, all around the country that allow things to be measured in real time, which I greatly appreciate. Further, link with these low-cost sensors. So Purple Air creates these sensors that you can use at your house, and it integrates with the data collection system. So again, super appreciate being able to have these high-quality sensors with more affordable sensors to give a better picture of the air quality in our areas. Okay, so you might be like, well, what do you mean by the particle size? And so, again, this is grouped into our PM10. So these are generally our big size particles. Our PM2.5, so particulate matter, 2.5 microns. So these are finer particles. And then we have these ultrafine particles, which are, again, 0.1 microns, for example. So that's usually called PM1. As we go through, the thing to keep in mind is that the larger the particle, the more it gets caught in like your cilia of your nose and all of the higher places within your lungs. It doesn't get so deep, for example. Whereas as you go smaller and smaller, it can penetrate deeper and deeper into your lungs, into the alveoli, the air sacs of your lungs. And the problem is that it's harder to get rid of. So as you get down to this ultrafine, for example, this is actually is considered being able to transfer and pass into the bloodstream. So you would expect to have issues related to the cardiometabolic function, for example, once you get at that really fine particulate matter. So they talk a lot about lung function. So there's increases in asthma, for example, associated with air pollution. And you'll also hear a term called COPD, so chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is simply an umbrella term to describe all sorts of different lung-related problems. So as we're looking at these, one of the things that we can think about is that it's not just these small particulates and then moving into cardiometabolic, but it turns out like the things that we breathe and the things that get into our bodies may also be influenced by the bacteria that are in our gut. And so I am very interested in how this works because it turns out that our gut microbiome might be having a bigger impact on the way that we're interacting with the environment than previously considered. So there's a whole source of pollutants that can be metabolized by gut microbacteria, which is unbelievably amazing and fascinating. But it gives us something else to think about as we're kind of thinking about air pollution, as we're thinking about toxicity, as we're thinking about all of these other things. And then there was a study that was just released, I believe that was this week, where they were looking, this is in Finland, where they were looking at these daycares, and they looked at the gut microbiome of these daycare centers before and after, looking at increasing nature, if you will, in these areas. And they found increases in all sorts of immune cells and the gut microbiome. It changed for these children even after 28 days. And the thing that I appreciate is that they were saying how, the intestinal microbiome of these children who received this greenery was similar to to children who visited the forest every day. So there may be some interactions between what we see in the environment, in a biodiverse environment, and how we respond to the pollution that's around us. So things to keep in mind. So in terms of fun things to use for keeping in your toolbox, that earth.nullschool.net is amazing. So it has all sorts of amazing overlays, and that shows up in real time. Also, as we're thinking about air quality, keep in mind that there's a term called scrubbers. And so essentially these, in smokestacks, for example, scrubbers can be installed where it can clean the air and pull some of these toxic byproducts out before it gets released. So know the term. There's all sorts of resources that are available related to that. And as you're looking for how to monitor what the air quality even looks like, you can go to airnow.gov, or you can see their fire and smoke map, which I appreciate. Again, as you're thinking about all of this, and this is the last slide, use climate change as a lens, because as we're thinking about all of the things that we're expecting to happen from, say, increased hurricanes or increased wildfires, we are expecting to see a lot of health impacts related to mental and physical health, related to toxic exposures, related to allergies, related to various disease progression. It is going to be substantial, and we need to prepare for it.